Murderers and serial killers have been a topic of interest for many years, especially in more modern times. However, sometimes the line between a healthy interest and an obsession become blurred. People taking inspiration from their favourite serial killers and going out to kill people themselves. In May 2021, a teenager known as Sarah, or as her online persona, Domina, would lure in men through dating apps in hopes of becoming one of those infamous serial killers that she was so obsessed with. Today we're going to be talking about the brutal murder of the man known as Zayed E. This series is made for educational purposes. Viewer discretion is advised. Domina Cherry, aka Sarah M, was born in 2002. Sarah was born in Switzerland to her parents as an only child, and as she grew up into a toddler, she actually moved to Bavaria, Germany, more specifically Forchheim, which had a population of around 32,000 people. As far as Sarah's childhood, Sarah had a pretty normal one. She had lots of friends, she did good in school. Sarah even owned a pet rabbit that was basically her best friend. She would take this pet rabbit everywhere. She had loving and attentive parents, and she had a great relationship with them, and overall she was just a very normal child. But when Sarah was a teenager, that's when everything would go downhill. She became very rebellious, very angsty, and when she was 15 she started smoking weed. And when she would smoke weed, she would frequently skip school, and since she was skipping school, she was having terrible grades. And as a teenager, Sarah thoroughly enjoyed annoying her parents. Like sometimes she would go out of her way to do things, like she wouldn't answer their phone calls. She would have parties at the house, just things that she knew would make her parents mad because she liked the attention, regardless of it being negative. And Sarah even started to have a lot of problems with the kids at school. She would constantly be getting into fights with everyone. It just seemed like Sarah was obsessed with the drama, with getting into fights with people. She would also not obey the school dress code. She would wear heavy makeup and dye her hair. And around this time is when she started to listen to a lot of heavy metal music and really embraced the heavy metal culture. She also started a rumour about herself, telling everyone that she was a prostitute. And that's how she got a lot of money to afford all the nice clothes that she wore. Which I think is a bit of a weird rumour to start about yourself, because it's a real problem, young people having to resort to prostitution. Also, not to mention the fact that prostitution's very illegal. Then in 2018, when Sarah was aged around 16, is when she started to experiment a little bit more into drugs. And as I said before, she used to smoke weed. But during this time, she started to get really into ecstasy and Molly. She was even arrested for possession of drugs, and when she was being arrested, it was said that she was extremely violent with the police. She was calling them names, she was kicking, she was screaming. Unfortunately, after getting involved with the law and drugs, is when Sarah began to self-harm, and a lot of the kids at her high school would see her with cuts on her wrists. She even started a YouTube channel at the time where she would go on to talk all about her struggles, and even said in one of her videos, quote, "I have depression and I do indeed harm myself. I don't recommend you doing it, by the way. Now I know you ask yourself, why'd you do it? And why shouldn't we? Honestly, I can't help myself, it calms me down, and it's like an addiction." Unfortunately, one day her mother was putting away some of her clothes when she opened up Sarah's closet, and that is where she would find a rope hanging. And obviously her mother was shocked by this, so she immediately checked her daughter into a psychiatric facility, which she would stay for an extended period. While she was staying at this psychiatric facility, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, as well as suffering hugely from all the psychedelics that she had been taking from a young age. And the doctors even said, quote, that she had emotional disturbance. I don't know if that's a proper mental health term. If they're saying so, I guess it is. But just because Sarah was getting treatment doesn't mean that she was getting any better. As I said, Sarah loved to be the centre of attention, and she loved the feeling of getting in trouble. So while she was in this psychiatric facility, she ended up befriending one of the patients there, to which she tried to convince that patient to take their own life. Now, luckily, this patient didn't actually do anything to themselves, but they did go to one of the other doctors about it. Sarah was taken out of that unit and then put into a different one, and this is when her stay was extended further because doctors felt that she had destructive tendencies. In 2019, at the age of 17, that is when she was released from the hospital. She began to have a lot of alone time in her bedroom, and that is when she started to pick up an interest in serial killers. But not just the regular true crime interests like you and I, it was more romanticising serial killers. And this is surprisingly quite common, I see in a lot of different cases, such as the case of Isabella Guzman, which we've covered on this case. However, people were obsessed with her because, they found her physically attractive, which to me, if I would think that being a murderer would be off-putting to some people, but I guess not. Sarah romanticised a lot of serial killers, and she even had Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez posters all over her room. Her favourite serial killer was definitely Richard Ramirez, and she even had him and Ted Bundy on her phone backgrounds. On Instagram, she would talk about how much she loved serial killers and how much she admired them, and one of her favourite serial killers was Jack the Ripper. She would frequently draw pentagrams on her palm to emulate Richard Ramirez at his trial. She would also draw all over her arm, and as I said before, she lives in Germany, and in Germany, drawing that symbol is very illegal. It can actually land you a 3-year prison sentence, which I found interesting during my research. I didn't know that. However, Sarah was never caught for this. And as for her obsession with serial killers, it started to grow. She started to sort of fantasize not about the serial killers themselves, but what it would be like to become one, and not. She didn't want to just be a serial killer. She wanted to be a famous one. As I said, she liked attention. And so at around the age of 17 is when she started to toy with the idea of what it would be like to kill someone and get away with it. Also at the age of 17, that is when she would get her first boyfriend named Leon. Now he is a very important character in today's case. Leon is very similar to Sarah in the fact that he struggles a lot with his mental health. He was also highly into drugs and had a lengthy criminal record. As this was Sarah's first boyfriend, she actually lost her virginity to Leon. The two of them were very in love and held a special connection because, this is the first time sharing an intimate experience, so you kind of form a bond over that. And because of this, they would spend every second of every day with each other. This is unfortunately where Sarah would later become obsessed with having sex. And she mostly loved sex because, as I said, she enjoyed attention. And when she was having sex, that she was being praised and being called hot, and it would just boost her ego. But as time went on, Sarah would try and make the sex more and more extreme, to the point where she would ask Leon to choke her and beat her. Which I'm not bothered what anyone does behind closed doors, as long as it's two consenting adults. However, lines can be crossed. Safety is the number one thing, so that's all I've got to say about that. I'm not kink shaming, don't worry. Anyway, she would force Leon to hit her harder and harder until she would have scratches, bruises, open wounds all over her body, to the point where they would get infected. March of 2021, the couple had been dating at this point for 2 years, and Sarah had continued to want more and more from Leon, and Leon started to feel extremely uncomfortable, because when he saw Sarah the next day in extreme pain with all these bruises and cuts all over her body, he felt bad because he didn't want to hurt her. or didn't want to see her in pain because he loved her. So after a while, it went from just some fun to being very uncomfortable, very violent. All the things she was asking him to do, he was just not comfortable with doing anymore. So after 2 years, Leon broke up with Sarah. And when this happened, Sarah was completely destroyed. She did not know what to do with her life. She was mad, she was sad, but it was also said that this breakup would be the catalyst for what is about to come. Over time, her sadness would later turn into anger, and this anger would turn into a desire for revenge. As revenge for Leon, she started to spread all the rumours about him, saying that he choked her, had abused her, had sexually assaulted her, and even took nude photos of her and posted it online. Later down the line, the police had talked to Leon, looked through all of his devices, and they couldn't find any evidence or any nude photos in his possession. They couldn't find any of her nude photos online. So since this was found out to be a lie, the credibility of the sexual abuse is also down the drain. I personally always want to believe victims of abuse and sexual abuse. However, in this case, I'm not so sure. At this point is when she decided that she wanted to murder Leon, but not just Leon, she wanted to murder hundreds of other men. In April of 2021, 1 week after the breakup, that is when Sarah started to put her murderous plans into action. She went to the store with a friend and bought a 12-inch camping knife, and she actually wasn't old enough to buy this knife, so she had to bring that friend with her who was over 18, and that friend bought that knife for her. She just told her friend, like, oh, I need this knife for camping, and her friend just didn't think much of it. For me personally, if my friend asked me to buy a knife, not happening. I also want to point out that I think it's very interesting that Sarah's weapon of choice was a knife, because stabbing someone is one of the most intimate ways of killing someone. If you shoot someone, you're from a far range, but when you're stabbing someone, you have to be up very close to them. So the fact that Sarah preferred that way over like shooting someone is just kind of eerie. It kind of seemed like Sarah was planning on enjoying these murders. Sarah even started Googling on her laptop, on her regular public browser, things such as, quote, how long does it take someone to die if you stab them in the neck? And, quote, how long does it take to die if you stab someone in the lung? And, quote, what is the best way to become a serial killer? Well, Sarah, the best way to become a serial killer is not to Google stupid shit like that. And as I said before, Sarah didn't just want to be a normal, regular serial killer. She wanted to be famous, and she wanted to be the killer that would have the most amount of victims. And so that is when Sarah would look up the murderer with the most amount of victims, and that is when she came across Harold Shipman. And if you guys don't know who Harold Shipman is, welcome to Earth. Harold Shipman is a doctor from Manchester, England, who killed a confirmed 218 patients, but it's speculated that that number goes up to 250. After Sarah reads this, she immediately texts her friend and says, quote, the biggest serial killer has committed around 250 murders, and I am going to do more. So how exactly was Sarah going to rack up 250 victims? Well, that is when she decided that she was going to lure in men through dating apps. She would make multiple dating profiles on apps such as Plenty of Fish and Tinder and some sugar daddy kind of apps in order to lure in these men. Sarah had made her murderous intentions very, very obvious. She had literally texted her friend and told her that she was going to commit murder, and openly Googling all of these questions about how to become a murderer. And if those things weren't obvious enough, when she was making these dating profiles, she used her own photos. So her face was just like front of center, all on these dating apps. But she didn't use her real name, Sarah. She actually went by the name Domina Cherry, which in German, Domina means like female dominatrix. And in her bio on these dating apps, she put, quote, A bisexual 19-year-old virgin who's looking for a good time that also has a strong interest in BDSM. And by that, you can already tell the type of people that she was luring in. Very creepy old men. And so for the next 3 days, Sarah would spend her days chatting with these men online, trying to figure out who her first victim would be. The first guy she talked to was a guy named Sam, to which he opened up the conversation by saying, quote, "Would you like to meet up? If so, where?" And Sarah responded, quote, "Sounds good." He responded with the licking lips emoji and, quote, "Do you have experience with older men?" Which Sarah replied to with, quote, "Yes, I've had experience with 28-year-olds. She also made it very known that nothing was off the table for her, that she was into everything, and she went on in conversation to say how she loves to be in control in the bedroom, which just entirely contradicts her story, because how could you have never had sex before but know exactly what you want in the bedroom? So I thought it was interesting how he said, "Do you have experience with older men?" And she said, "I've had experience with 28-year-olds, as if 28 is old. I feel like that little bit just basically tells you how young Sarah is when she's doing all of this. To her, 28-year-old is like older. Anyway, I digress. After this, Sam asks Sarah if she's 18, and she says, "Yes, I am over 18. And that's when the two of them plan to meet up on May 3rd. Sarah was also talking to another man by the name of Murad, and he was a lot more blunt than Sam had been. He opened the conversation by saying, quote, "Hey, hope everything is fine with you. When are we meeting, babe?" And she responded saying, quote, "Anytime after May 3rd, because May 3rd was her date with Sam." And Murad responded, quote, "Sex in the car then?" And Sarah, quote, responded with, quote, "Whatever you want. We can also drive to my cabin. It's really nice and it's in the middle of the forest. It even has heating and an oven so we won't be disturbed." So that's when Murad actually reveals that he's a teacher and says, quote, "Yes, yes, whatever. I'm into some unusual sexual practices. Is this okay with you?" Sarah says, quote, "Yes, I prefer blindfold and handcuffs. Make sure to bring this with you." And there was actually a third man that she was talking to named Anthony. Not going to dwell on this conversation much because it's a bit wild to talk about for YouTube. They probably won't like that. But the conversation is along the lines of him being her slave and being dominated by her. And she actually plans to meet up with him on May 5th. Over the course of the first 3 days that she had put out her dating profiles, she had been contacted by 224 men. And as I said, Sarah had a goal of hitting over 250. So it seemed like it was going to be very easy for her to be able to get to that count. Sarah actually planned on going on a killing spree and even told her friend that she was going to do this. She was going to go on dates with these men one by one and slit their throats. Now, I'm not really sure what this friend's reaction is to all of this. I'm not sure that they thought it was just like a dark joke or something. And on the 4th day, that is when Sarah receives a message from a man named Zayed. And that's when she decides that Zayed is going to be her first victim. Zayed is of Iranian descent, and there's not really much to know about him because of Germany's very strict privacy laws. But what we do know about him is that he was 39. He had moved to Germany from Iran at the age of 32, so he'd only been living in Germany for 7 years. He was one of 6 brothers, although unfortunately both of his parents had passed away. After his parents had passed away, he came to Germany for a new start. He worked as a private security guard for a living, and he also loved football. That was one of his favourite sports. He loved watching it and even played it in his spare time. Zayed had high hopes for himself. He had his future planned out. He was 39, he wanted to settle down, he wanted to have kids, he wanted to get married and wasn't really looking for hookups or that kind of thing. He was looking for more of a long-term thing. And then on May 1st of 2021, Zayed would message Sarah saying, quote, "Hello, good morning," at 10:53 a.m, and Sarah responded with, quote, "What are you looking for here on Badoo?" And Zayed responds with, quote, "Well, I'm a single man looking for anything really." Sarah says, quote, "Want to meet up with the kissy face emoji," and Zayed responds, quote, "Well, of course." And then he asks, quote, "Are you the devil's bride?" To which she responds with, quote, "Yes, the devil's bride himself." And that's when Sarah asked Zayed if he had a car because there was no train station in her town. And Zayed said that he did have a car, so they actually made plans to meet up that night at 8 p.m. He was going to pick up Sarah from a local bus stop, and the plan was that from there, at the bus stop, he was going to pick her up, and then from there they were going to drive out to Sarah's remote cabin in the woods. While she was waiting for Zayed to show up, she starts Googling more things such as, quote, "how to hide a body," and, quote, "how long does it take for someone to bleed out?" While she's trying to plan out this murder that she's going to commit that night, Leon actually shows up at her house because he was there to collect a few of his things. And Sarah said later on that when Leon showed up, it took every fibre of her being not to take out the knife and just start stabbing him and murder him right there. But she held herself back and didn't do anything because she wanted Leon's murder to be a lot more special. And Leon was actually terrified that Sarah might try and do something, because Leon had his friend drive him to Sarah's house and told his friend that if he started tugging on the curtains by the window, to immediately come inside. If he wasn't out within 10 minutes, to go inside and storm the house. But luckily nothing happened to Leon. He got his stuff and leaves, and then at about 7:30 p.m. is when Zayed texted Sarah saying that he was on his way. After this, that's when Sarah tries to call her friend Francisca, but she didn't answer, so she ends up leaving a voicemail that says, quote, "I'm going out now. I'm going to kill my first. I'm excited. It's pouring rain out. Please wish me luck. It works." And then after this voicemail, she actually sends a text to Francisca saying, quote, "Going to go all natural born killer. Now wish me luck." Then sends a video of her dancing around her room with the knife in her waistband. And so when Francisca saw this video, and she immediately started to panic because she actually realised that her friend was going out to commit murder. And so it's known that she was panicking because after this she began to Google, quote, "Are you punished if you know about an attempted murder?" Which, for those who don't know, that is illegal. If a crime is about to happen, or you are aware of a crime that is about to happen, and you don't come forward to the police, you are technically a witness to this crime, and that is punishable. Who really knows if Francisca went to the police when she had received this text? It could have been a very different outcome. Sarah shows up at the bus stop and she starts Googling things such as, quote, "places to put a person who's bleeding out," and, quote, "what happens if you stab someone in the neck?" At this time, Francisca texts Sarah and says, quote, "How do you plan on doing this without getting caught?" And Sarah responded with a voice memo saying, quote, "The plan is for me to say, 'Hey, I have a surprise for you. Close your eyes, and then I'm going to stab him.'" And then at the end of it, she starts imitating gurgling and stabbing sounds while laughing. So then at 8:20 p.m, that is when Zayed arrives at the bus stop and picks up Sarah, and they drive off to this remote cabin, and the whole entire time Sarah is talking to Zayed. She's trying to flirt with him and try to make him feel a lot more comfortable. And then at 8:30 p.m, that's when Sarah directs Zayed to turn down a deserted road, and then asks Zayed to pull over, to which he does. And the both of them get out, and Sarah gives her phone to Zayed and says, "Hey, look at this." And while on the phone, Zayed's The knife had actually hit his jugular vein and he screamed out. He immediately started to fight back and he tried to take the knife out of Sarah's hands, and this kind of threw Sarah off because she wasn't expecting Zayed to fight back. She thought that she was just going to stab him and he would just fall to the ground. But Zayed is a private security guard, you know. Sarah's a small little girl, so regardless, Sarah is able to break away and run away as far as she can, while Zayed is able to apply enough pressure to his wounds to stop the bleeding, and then stumbles to a main road where he flags down a car. This car pulls over and there's 2 people inside. Unfortunately, one of these people in the car was actually a nurse, so they started to treat Zayed immediately and called an ambulance. So back to Sarah. Sarah had fled the scene, and at this point she had ran so far that she ran into a nearby town, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce because I can barely speak English, so let alone German. However, it was the central station of this town. While she was walking around in town, people started staring at her because Sarah had no shoes on, her tights were ripped, and she was covered in blood. And she was even walking around mumbling underneath her breath, quote, "I'm a murderer, I'm a killer." So someone sees this and they call the police immediately. And 37 minutes after the attack, Sarah was put into police custody. And when Sarah was found, the police had no clue what Sarah had done. They'd thought maybe she'd gotten lost or maybe something had happened to her, so that's when Sarah tells the police that she had killed someone. So the police ask her, well, did you kill them out of self-defense? And Sarah just responds with, quote, "No, I wanted to cut someone up and watch them die." And so the police immediately take her down to the station for questioning. And when they are trying to figure out what had happened, that's when Sarah says, quote, "I've just tried to kill someone. You know, it would be such a waste if I went to jail only for attempted murder. I had planned so much more." When asked again if this murder was out of self-defense, she responds with, "No, I wanted to slash his throat. I wanted to watch him die." Sarah then reveals to the police that she had murdered a man by the name of Zayed, and Sarah is then arrested. Back at the hospital, the doctors are trying to work on Zayed and trying to keep him alive, but unfortunately, after days of operating, he unfortunately slipped into a coma. He was in this coma for 19 days, and all of his family had come out from Iran to come and say their goodbyes. After 19 days in this coma, Zayed unfortunately passed away. Zayed had passed away, that's when Sarah's charges were upped from attempted murder to murder, but Sarah showed absolutely no remorse for the murder. She bragged about it as much as she could, and she even went telling people that it was sad that she got caught so early because she had so many more exciting ideas. And while in prison, Sarah got loads of attention because she was actually put into a unisex prison. So she was only one of 3 women in that prison, and she got lots of male attention. They viewed her as a hero. They would all cheer for her when she entered the room, which, seeing men were her victim type, I don't get, because and so obviously this boosted Sarah's ego even more. She felt like murdering someone was a good thing and she deserved all the praise for it. And so she even called her mum and asked her mum if she could put money into her commissary account so that she would be able to buy clothes and be the best dressed person in the prison, because there are actually some prisons in Germany that allow you to wear regular civilian clothes. You can buy regular clothes, and so Sarah was at a prison like that. Of all the things that Sarah could have worn, she decided to wear a bright orange jumpsuit that she had seen all her favourite American serial killers wear. And she even asked the guards if she could put up posters of Ted Bundy around her cell, which obviously they said no. I don't know what she thought. Her mum even visited her in prison, and she had asked her mum if she could go out and murder Leon because he was the next on her list, and she never got the opportunity to. Obviously, her mum said no because she was a normal person, and after this, she started to make her visits to Sarah a lot less frequent. And in May of 2022, that's when Sarah's trial was, and even at that trial, she showed no remorse or guilt. It seemed as if she sort of loved all the attention. At her trial, she wore a leather jacket and she smoked cigarettes. She dyed her hair red and wore heavy eye makeup. And Zayed's family had showed up for the entire trial, and even when Zayed's family went up there and they cried about how much they missed him and how much that he meant to them, Sarah continued to show no remorse, no guilt, no apology, and no respect. But when Sarah went up there to tell her side of the story, she did not deny anything, and she didn't spare any details. She was very open and told the court that she planned on killing over 250 men, and she went on to talk about all the men she had had conversations with and how her intentions were to murder all of them. But she said that although she wanted to murder all of these men, the one man to blame for all of this was her ex-boyfriend Leon. She says that Leon is the reason why she wanted to go on a murderous spree. She said that throughout her and Leon's relationship, he would frequently abuse her and at one point even try to murder her. And so obviously these are very serious claims. So they brought Leon in to testify, and I'm assuming Sarah didn't really expect Leon to be there, because as soon as she saw him, she started jumping out of her chair, starting to try and attack him. Obviously the guards were there holding her back, so she couldn't do anything. But she was crying the whole time that Leon was on the stand. Leon, of course, denied all the accusations that Sarah had made against him. He said that he was aware that Sarah was obsessed with serial killers, but he didn't really know the extent of it. A friend of Sarah's even went up on the stand and said, quote, "It's unimaginable to me that's not the Sarah I know. I only know her as a caring friend who puts others before herself." Another friend went up and said, quote, "We've often talked about true crime, and she often posted pictures of Richard Ramirez. Even still, I wasn't concerned. She once asked me for my opinion on Jack the Ripper, and said that she actually thinks she was a woman and therefore never got caught." A best friend of Sarah's by the name of Tim actually went up to testify and said, quote, "I wrote her a letter and asked her if the news of the crime was true, and she said yes. When I first heard about it, my initial thought was maybe it was self-defense, or maybe the man tried to force himself onto her." The judge then said that Sarah was heartless and cruel and a danger to society, and if she was never caught, she would have gone on undetected and definitely would have murdered so many more innocent people. And it is true that she would have murdered more people because she literally had dates lined up. Like, this crime happened on May 1st, she had dates on both May 3rd and May 5th. That's 2 more victims in the same week. But when Sarah was asked why Zayed, out of all the guys she had talked to, why did she pick Zayed first? And she said that because he was the only man that she had talked to that had a car and, well, had no kids, because that was kind of a rule for herself. She said that if the person had kids, it was an automatic no-go. And even on the stand, in front of Zayed's entire family, she bluntly said that she had no remorse for what she did, and she mostly did it because she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. And so, even though she was being locked up, she really didn't care, because at least she got to experience what she wanted to. That is when the judge handed her a 12-year sentence in a psychiatric facility, which I know a lot of you are going to think that's not enough, and I would agree with you. When she was walking out of her sentencing, she opened up her palm, and on her palm was a pentagram, exactly the same as her favourite serial killer, Richard Ramirez, at his murder trial. What happened to Francisca, that friend that knew about the murder before it happened? Well, Francisca was actually going to get 5 years in prison and had a list of charges. But all of those charges were later dropped and nothing happened to her for unknown reasons. And as for today, Sarah is now 21 years old. She currently eats a vegetarian diet, does daily workouts, and watches TV every day. She's said to be released in 11 years at the age of 31, which is scary. I hope she has been successfully treated by the time she gets released, because if she is not, she will definitely go on to kill again. So that is all I have for this case. If you've enjoyed, please give it a like, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time for a brand new episode.